My fruits, welcome to the broadcast. I hope you had a spooky Halloween. I certainly did. And I've brought out the orange velvet. I'm having another go with it. I've tried to draw it in at the waist because it was too baggy the first time I attempted to wear it and too orange. But I'm giving it another go in a nod to Halloween together with the jack-o'-lantern. So, a little bit of spooky. I'm sorry it's a bit late, but should we pretend it's fashionably late? Then I can get away with it. Thank you. We have confirmation of how the Queen, the late Queen, spelt the word granny. I'm not sure if we've seen it in her handwriting beforehand. I'm sure we probably have somewhere, but here it is in a note that was auctioned off in 2016. And it's gone viral again over the past week, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention. The note was sent to William back in the 90s with an advent calendar for Christmas saying, "William, I hope you enjoy opening this each day from Granny." Or love Granny. I think it says from, I can't quite decipher it. But Granny nevertheless, with a Y. And we spoke about this fairly recently because in tributes to the Queen from Harry and William, the difference was noted by me, and I'm sure others. Harry spelt it with a Y, as the Queen does, and as most of Britain does. William went for IE, which is more common in the north of the country and in Scotland, so I believe. Obviously, it changes. There's various spellings all over the place. Millions of families spell it however they want to and chop a change between Y and IE. But Y is certainly most common here, as I'm told it is in America. And quite a few people berated Harry a month ago when these tributes came out because they said, he's copying Meghan. Y, spelling granny with a Y, is the American way of spelling granny. But as I made clear at the time, no, it's actually very popular here in England and more popular than IE. So if anybody got it wrong, it was actually Big Willy. But of course there's no wrong or right. Granny's granny. There we go. And perhaps she's granny with an IE when she was in Scotland. Who knows? Just like King Charles is King Corsicot when he's in Scotland. You see, these things chop and change. But it's kind of nice to just have a bit of confirmation there of how the Queen went about it. But this notelet, a private family notelet, was auctioned off by a member of Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace staff. This is what I don't understand. A former employee. You know, fair enough if they get their hands on these discarded bits of ephemera, these family documents, but how on earth do they get away with selling it off as if it was one of their possessions? You know, you would think that their contracts were watertight enough to prevent this kind of thing happening. I don't think it's right. But it doesn't seem to bother the royal family too much because they're not making a fuss about it. In fact, they don't make a fuss about a lot. And one thing I've noticed quite recently is the easing of caution over the Crown episodes that are due to be aired in the near future. And we hear from Dominic West, who's playing Prince Charles, as he was then in The Crown. We've had some information come through from him that he was worried that he would offend the royal family because he is an ambassador for the Prince's Trust. And, you know, in The Crown, they're going to be going through all the Camilla-gate, Tampongate affair, rehashing all of that and God knows what else. He was worried, he said in a recent interview, so he pointed out this potential conflict of interest to the Prince's Trust and offered to resign from it so that there was no conflict. But he was told in no uncertain terms by Charles's personal private secretary, absolutely not. There's no need for that. We reject what you're telling us, that there's some need or conflict of interest. You're an actor. You do what actors do. Isn't that a grown-up attitude? Especially from the office of someone who is famous for being sensitive and touchy and tempestuous, and I'm sure he has those moments, but he didn't take offence to it. His attitude was, actors are actors, you know, I love my thespian friends, get on with it. Do what you gotta do. Not bothered, not bothered. And I'm taking a bit of that attitude on board myself, you know, I do get my knickers in a twist here and there. Maybe I need to relax them and drop the panties sometimes. Take a leaf out of Camilla's book. So, yeah, tacit approval there from the palace. Tacit approval. So it just goes to show you, doesn't it? Some people aren't so sensitive as other members of the family. We also know that Camilla met with Emerald Fennell, don't we? Not too long ago, who played her in the last series of The Crown. She met with her, was perfectly fine, and they had a joke and a giggle about it and a laugh. So perhaps when people get their knickers in a twist about the Crown, including me, perhaps we need to unwind our knickerbockers a bit and just think, well, maybe all publicity is good publicity in the end. You know, I certainly stand by the fact that I think it's disgraceful that no disclaimer is put at the start of every episode. I stand by that. But I've never wanted to force them to stop making fiction. Everyone should have the artistic license and be free to produce whatever they want, whether it's good, bad, or nonsense on stills. You know, do what you will, my dear, but I do think there should be some protection afforded to living, breathing figures of history. But that being said, the palace don't seem to have a huge problem with it. And actually, you know that they're going to be going through the whole Tampongate affair. Well, I'm actually rather pleased about this, and I've spoken about Tampongate in the past, how distasteful the matter is, but not because of what Charles and Camilla did. I'm a staunch defender of Charles and Camilla in relation to that vulgar episode, because it was a private conversation between two people in an intimate relationship. And they are entitled to a private life. They are entitled to a ribald, raunchy sense of humour that might be considered vulgar or gauche, as Dominic West put it. I think that was the wrong word. He said, like most people in 1993, I remember thinking it was a sordid, embarrassing discussion, but revisiting it, I found it was just an intensely personal conversation. And what was sordid was the prurient interest in it. Most people, if they're lucky enough, will have had conversations like that with people they love. It's very sweet, tender, and gauche, but like any intensely personal conversation, just not for public consumption. Yeah, I don't think gauche is right. It should be vulgar, if anything. You know, I mean, it was rather vulgar. But the thing I've always had a problem is how misrepresented it is, that conversation, that people, and I'm talking about dumb folk, they are without question dumb folk, with zero investigative skills. Zero. Goose egg. Zero investigative skills. Cheap.
He's disgusting. He wanted to come back as a tampon. He wanted to be reincarnated as a tampon.
No. If you're going to besmirch him, at least get it right. The entire point of that conversation was that he did not want to return as a tampon. And he said that it would be just his luck. I mean, he didn't mind coming back as a pair of knickers or inside her trousers. But then he said, it would be just my luck to come back as a tampon, endlessly swirling around the top of the toilet, never flushing away. And that is always missed. And I think that makes the entire conversation a different context. Yes, no, it might not be to your personal taste. You might not want to hear such things. I don't particularly want to hear such things. But it is completely different to saying that, I wish I was reincarnated as your tampon, Camilla. That would be wonderful. As if he's getting his jollies from that sort of affair. No, that isn't what he said. So I'm actually rather happy that this conversation will be portrayed, Dominic West says, sympathetically, because it might let people see that they were having an ordinary, silly conversation during a love affair, and it's a conversation that should never have been broadcast. And as Dominic West says, now with hindsight and looking back on what actually said and was happened, he realised that the sordid nature of it was actually the public reaction and the fact that it was recorded in the first place. That is what was sordid. So Charles and Camilla have my every sympathy for that episode. The Wessexes have been out and about, doing sterling work on our behalf, as they always do. The Earl and Countess of Wessex and Forfar. Because they're in Scotland. They've been in Scotland. Forfar. Sophie at the Early Learning Centre. What accent was that? I can but try, dears. Sophie was at the Early Learning Centre looking immaculate in a beautiful coat in a light colour. An attractive hairdo it was. A cow's lick and ringlet affair, which I thought was just divine. Charming people wherever they go, these exemplary royals. And Edward was at the Ogilvy distillery in a marvellous blue kilt, and this is Scotland's first vodka-dedicated distillery. He was shown around the farm, which has been owned by the same family there for 100 years, and it's a farm where they produce potatoes to make the vodka. They trotted along to Lawson Memorial Church, and they mixed and met with hundreds of members of the congregation, over 200 of them, giving them their personal time. It was a service of thanksgiving for the life of the Queen. Whew! Holy cow! They must have attended 100 of those services over the last 2 months, haven't they? And our steady Eddie, who's already got his work cut out, became the patron. He took on another patronship, this time patron of Reading Repertory Theatre, which is a cultural and theatrical hub in Berkshire. Very elegant there in corduroy, wasn't he? Very elegant. I love that retro vibe. What a gentleman of exquisite taste, as all the members of the royal family are. All the males. They all put their best foot forward and show how it should be done with style, don't they? Style and elegance. And speaking of impeccable style and elegance, well, here he comes, Big Willy, in his capacity as patron of Tusk. At the 10th Tusk Conservation Awards, he strolled in that beautiful back suit, hugging that tall figure of his. That bow tie, beautiful, shiny patent shoes, and I saw so many flashes of Diana, because there's some footage of this gathering online, so many flashes of Diana in his smile. Harry didn't get Diana's look. You see a bit of it here and there, but it's more the Duke of Edinburgh, more from his papa's side. William is very much a Spencer in the face. And you see those flashes, that charm, that wonderful attention that he gives, the genuine attention that he gives to everybody gathered there. So handsome. And brandishing on that broad chest of his one solitary, scarlet, gay poppy. He spoke absolutely beautifully there, I've got to tell you. The boy gets better and better at public speaking. Nice modulations in the voice. Beautiful sounds. Very impressed. Also, Peter Phillips was there. You know, twinkly-eyed Peter, our comfy sofa compadre, in attendance. Nonsense on Stilts returned to Spotify in the form of Archetypes with Meghan Markle. Good wife, bad wife. Good mom, bad mom. More word salad dished out. I tried to find out the ratings for this show. As of today, which is the day after it aired, it's at number 5 in the States and number 13 in the Kingdom. So comparatively much more popular in the States than the Kingdom, according to Spotify. And number 5 in the States, but it's on the way down. So it seems that it was at a higher number. I'm afraid I didn't capture what that number was that it reached yesterday. I don't know if it's still hitting 1 or 2. I heard that Kim Kardashian was outshining Markle on last week's podcast, but you know, we've said before, we're not quite sure how Spotify come to these ratings, how it's actually compiled. I'd be very curious to know the actual figures, and out of those figures I'd be curious to know how many have actually tuned in to listen rather than just have a good laugh. Although there's not even much to laugh at now because they are nonsense on stilts and incredibly boring, and it was painful for me to wade through and listen to yet another one of these broadcasts. They're all nuts. All of their friends are nuts, with the exception of 1 or 2. I'm sorry. She's obviously surrounding herself with those who are like her. Fruitcakes. Absolute fruitcakes. You know, it wouldn't go amiss, and it would actually behoove her and broaden and expand her mind a bit if she didn't just surround herself with people who are just into psychobabble, constantly patting oneself on the back, weird introspection, And why does she talk like an imbecile throughout the whole thing? I get that. I get the fact that she's now just trolling the world with this stupid, hyper-giggly, conspiratorial. And she says, just like I've accused her of in many podcasts lately, of this high school girl get-together to be all gossipy, which we can all enjoy from time to time, and I'm guilty of that as anybody. But it is unbecoming for a woman of her years to live in that mode rather than just have the occasional giggly moment, which is always fun. You know, I've got an exceptionally childlike nature, so I get it. But, you know, perhaps, and it must be because she is simply not capable of a decent, mature conversation. And she says herself, we were like schoolgirls, giddy. But you're always like a schoolgirl, and you're always in this giddy mode of going on about your fabulous celebrity friends. Oh, it was just so nice to catch up with them. Just by chance we met, my dear friends. Stop showing off, because we don't care about your dumb friends. They're all crackers. They're all bonkers, just like you and Has. Sophie has become a dear friend, she says of the First Lady of Canada. Poor Canada, that's all I can say. She met Sophie, or Soph. She calls her Soph. You know, me and Soph are like that. Their friendship goes back 7 years. Well, you've heard of the 7-year itch? That could be round the corner, my dear. That could be round the corner. Wonder what she made of Justin's blackface episode when the world went crazy about that. When I was pregnant, Soph sent me meditations to help me through the pregnancy. She's the one that I go to for advice all the time. And as usual, she uses the podcast and the topic of the podcast to justify her own impertinent behaviour. When righteousness, dogma and superiority repulses her, which I believe was a dig at the royal family, the British institution. That came over quite a lot in this episode. There comes a time when a woman no longer fears confrontation, but guards like a lioness. I'm paraphrasing, but she comes out with this archetype of the lioness. You know, she's not going to be afraid or cowed anymore or silenced by righteousness. Those who think that they are righteous and superior. Maybe because they were. And this was interesting. She said that she drops the role of saviour. Well, no one asked you to be saviour. Harry's saviour. The chicken's saviour. She drops the role of saviour, knowing she can only save herself. Isn't that interesting? She dropped the role of saviour, of Harry's saviour, when she realised that everyone hated her for it. And she thought, no, I can only focus on myself. Well, you realised that a bit too late, didn't you? You realised that after you'd wreaked havoc and damage to Harry's life as his saviour. And now you want this get out clause that you realise, no, you can't be his saviour. Well, you were his saviour, and look at what you did. No. I'm washing my hands of that responsibility. I can only be my own saviour. You know, he's a big boy. He'll have to look after himself. He'll have to make that decision. And, you know, if he's no longer talking to Charles, or if he can no longer go on with that relationship, as she hinted in the Cut magazine, that's his business. That's nothing to do with me. I can't be your saviour, Harry. I can't. But, my love, you are my saviour. That's why you dragged me out of the royal family and away from everything that I knew and the nation that I loved. No, Harry, I can't be your saviour. I'm not Christ. I mean, they call me the second coming. And I know that you've known me to come 2 or 3 times, 4 times in a row, because you're so talented, Harry. But no, I'm not your saviour. You did it all yourself. You have to think for yourself. I can only be in charge of my own destiny. When it suits you, love. When it suits you. And then she goes on and on about my husband, my husband, my husband. Now, I am aware that in royalty, this is common. You know, it is common for all of them to refer to each other as my wife, my husband. I get it. I know it might sound like I'm just going in for the sake of it, but it does jar, doesn't it? it's continual, and she said it a few times in this podcast, or well, at least twice, but it was in a row, and it jumps out, and it has been commented on in the press. My husband, because it's so stupid, because they're not official royals anymore. They don't like the formality. They don't like this superiority. So why does she... I mean, we all know his name's Harry. Or Henry, whatever you want to call him. We all know his name's Has. So why don't you call him Has? Or Haribo? Or Has-Been? Why? Why this dumb game with my husband, this, that and the 10th? So dumb. One of the guests that I thought sounded all right, actually, was the lesbian girl. Sam J. She describes herself as a masculine woman. She seemed quite cool compared to a lot of the rest of them. This queer person. Meghan brought up the subject of, one of these queer people, which is another word that people help themselves and bandy around so freely now, which to many of us is as offensive as the N-word is to many people. But because it's the fashion, it's the vogue, it's just flung around as if it should be acceptable to anybody, because that's the current way, and that's what's in vogue. And it's the umbrella of the queers. And if you don't like that word, if you find it absolutely monstrous, well, just suck it up, because that is the modus operandi of the zeitgeist of the moment. I'm not sensitive about these things, but if she takes so much trouble tiptoeing around other words and other archetypes and other things that might offend people, it's strange, isn't it, that a certain club, a certain sector of society, they're very happy to imagine a word like queer and bandy it around as if it's utterly inoffensive. They pick and choose what's offensive and what isn't anymore, when actually that word is terribly offensive to many people still, and they don't like being thrown in together with that or other segments of the letters community. These are conversations that move the needle. Another one of her phrases, move the needle. She's going to go all Danny Minogue and put the needle on it. Move the needle. You'll find your North Star if you just move the needle, and I think that's what's key. She really is a talking phrase book, isn't she? All that reading time when she could actually be learning and cultivating her mind and her brain. The stuff she reads, the stuff in that library. Love to you all, and bottoms up, my dears. Mine certainly is, and I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast. My tip jar can be found in the description box below underneath the video. Thank you, one and all, and enjoy the rest of your week. Toodles.